Welcome and thank you for joining us. You are listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about a little bit of magic. Although it's not something that you simply wave a wand, you will discover that you are your own genie in the bottle. But at the same time, you might want to be careful what you wish for. On the program today, we're going to be talking about a new book called The Path of Synchronicity. It's how to align yourself with your life's flow. And I'd like to welcome to our program today, Dr. Alan Hunter. Alan, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, thank you for including me, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet. Now, it's interesting because this day and age we seem to be talking a lot about the secret, the law of attraction, and so forth, but your book really lends a lot of discipline and thought when it comes to a thing called synchronicity. Let's talk about that.
Yes, I'd be very happy to, yeah. Where would you like to begin?
Let's begin with what synchronicity is.
Okay, well, synchronicity is one of those things that people sometimes tend to wrinkle their noses up at when they think about it. Synchronicity is something that we've all experienced. It's that moment when everything just clicks into place, almost magically, when what we thought couldn't be done just seems to happen, when the right person turns up at the right time. And sometimes people say, oh, well, wasn't that lucky? Or, gosh, isn't he or she or they lucky? But I take a lot of trouble in the book to suggest that perhaps there is more at issue than just dumb luck. And that's really the essence of it. Synchronicity is something that may very well be something we can get in tune with. And when we do that, really extraordinary things happen.
I remember when I was a young child, probably about the age of 8 years old, when I started sort of discovering what you're talking about here, that coincidental thing where I would think or I'd say a thing and all of a sudden it seemed to sort of materialize in front of me. One of the silliest things, believe it or not, was back in the day I was a big fan of Leviathan movies, Godzilla, King Kong, you name it. And I thought one day, it sure would be neat if Godzilla and King Kong would fight each other. Sure enough, I'm digging through a TV guide in 1975, and there it is, Godzilla versus King Kong, and I thought, this is crazy! But, I started explaining that to, one of my younger brothers, and he was sitting there, well, if you think you can just, come up with something, why don't you just say, well, there's a, say a Corvette or something ridiculous like that. And I said, well, no, it doesn't work quite that fast. But, at the same time, he was younger and he didn't get what I was saying. But sometimes it's kind of funny how when this does occur, though, we sort of find our heads, we're kind of scratching our heads like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And is it possible that I can kind of continue this? But it takes a lot more discipline than one thinks.
Yes, it does, actually. I mean, one of the things that people tell me about, well, The Secret and things like that, is they say, oh, well, all you have to do is imagine your new car or your new job and pop, it appears before you. Well, it's not quite as simple as that, and if we think it's that simple, we're setting ourselves up for an enormous disappointment. And I take a lot of trouble in the book to say that what we need to do right from the get-go is three things. The first thing is you have to entertain the idea that synchronicity is even possible. If you can't believe that there is a force out there which is directing our lives, whatever you want to call that force, then you're not going to even be able to see what is popping up in front of your face. Now, many people I've spoken with, most of whom are over 50, say that when they look back over their lives, they look over the events of their lives and they say, gosh, it really feels as though there was kind of a shaping hand, a guiding force here. And I say, well, do you want to take that seriously or not? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, well, yes, I think there has been some sort of force or some chain of events that's brought me to right here and right now. And if we can begin to think in those terms, it gives us a whole different view of perhaps what the business of life on Earth is all about, and that is perhaps it's not about me. Can I get as much of the shiny toy and loot stash as possible, but maybe we're here actually to do something. And I hear this with parents all the time, where they say, it looks as though my business on Earth was to bring these kids into the world because they're kind of wonderful. And I say, well, guess what? That's not a bad purpose. And that may be a pattern that is discernible that actually shows people moving in a place of synchronicity.
Now, in your book, The Path of Synchronicity, one of the things that you really start touching on right away, and you really go into depth with, especially when you start sharing, how literature is really showered with examples of how we can come to understand this, is that shadow of ourselves. Let's talk about what that is specifically and how it pertains to people when we're thinking about synchronicity.
Yeah. As you say, literature is full of the idea of synchronicity. I mean, 3,500 years of Western literature, completely saturated with the idea that the main character is on some sort of journey, and that when that happens, certain things are put in motion, and when the character is determined to get from A to B, Odysseus trying to get home, or Cinderella trying to meet the prince. When that happens, the forces of nature align in certain ways to help the person along. And I mention this because this is a major component of what we as human beings use to explain the world to ourselves. Story. Story is how we try to make sense of things. And synchronicity is all the way through it. Now, why is it that if you talk to somebody about a synchronous event in your life, you will have a 50-50 chance of being met with skepticism, but yet our literature and all of our stories, even our TV dramas, they all depend upon an idea of fate or destiny coming round in an even-handed way. So I'll hold that idea for a moment, and I'll address the second part of your question, if I could, and that is the idea of the shadow. Because the shadow self, we've all got one. We've all got a little part of us that is, or maybe quite a large part of ourselves, that is angry and destructive and disappointed and sad, and most of the time we repress that. And most of the time when people ask us how we are, we say, fine. And that's what we need to do to get by in the world. But that does tend to mean that we're only living about half of our selfhood. We're rigorously forgetting all of our less than desirable qualities. And what I suggest in the book is that what we have to do in order to use synchronicity properly is we have to face our whole selves first. We have to say, I am these good qualities and I am these bad qualities. And the bad qualities are almost always coming from the place of an imagined ego slight. That's what anger is. We imagine, or perhaps somebody has actually treated us badly. But we can let go of that anger, and most of us tend not to, and that gets in the way of us seeing the real opportunities that the world is spreading before us every day. But we're caught up in this negative space, which is called the shadow, because just like a shadow, it's attached to us, it's right behind us, but it's the dark aspect of us. So we have to see our whole selves, and then we can make this wonderful power work for us.
You give great examples, too. One of the ones that was a story that I'd never actually heard was the story of 5 weapons, who was actually, 2 incarnates away from becoming a Buddhist, or the Buddha, excuse me.
The Buddha himself,
And, you think that's an interesting story, because although it's a violent one, and Buddhist precept, the idea is to practice nonviolence, but in reality it was somebody who was actually being challenged on his courage, it seems, But
exactly.
The thing is that we tend to go out there thinking we have to fight against life, when if we just simply surrendered, it seems, what our natural talents are, what we were put here to do once we discover what that is, that life will do very much the same thing. It will just surrender itself to us.
Yes, yes. Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned Prince Five Weapons, because his story, your listeners may not know it, so I'll just say a few words about it. And that is, Prince Five Weapons obviously is an expert and a prince. He's an expert in the use of 5 weapons. Now, this is a very old myth, a very old story. And he's just full of himself. He's very happy, and he's riding through the woods, the dark woods, when he meets this monster, which is called Sticky Hair, rather an odd name. And the monster says, do your worst. And Prince Five Weapons starts to use his 5 weapons, his javelin, his bow and arrow, his club, his sword, and his discus. And he hurls them one after another at Sticky Hair, and they all stick in his hair, but do him no damage at all. And it's this is the point when we begin to think that 5 weapons maybe corresponds to the idea of 5 senses. So Sticky Hair, this ghastly monster, looms towards him, and Prince Five Weapons kicks him, and his foot sticks, and kicks him with the other foot, and the other foot sticks. And then he hits him with his fist, and that sticks. And then he hits him with the other fist, and there they are, they're locked together, which is a wonderful image for the positive and the negative aspects of the self meeting when we try to crush down the shadow. And there they are, they're locked in this embrace, sort of embrace, I suppose. And Sticky Hair says, I'm going to devour you whole, I'm going to swallow you. And Prince Five Weapons says, I'm not afraid, because even if I'm inside you, I am going to burst my way out of the center of your body. And that's when Sticky Hair says, okay, you win. And what he means by that, or what the story seems to mean, is that, as you so rightly said, Dan, this is about whether we will continue to have courage even when everything seems to be going against us. And what the Prince Five Weapons learns and demonstrates is he not only has courage, but it is indomitable courage. Now, how does that apply to anything? Well, recently in the news we've been watching all the stuff happening in North Africa, Syria and Egypt, and I hear the news reporters saying really interesting things. And one of the things they said just last week was they said, this particular crowd, I think they were talking about Libya, in which case it was more than a week ago, said this crowd has passed the fear threshold. And the other reporter said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, they're no longer afraid of being shot at or tear-gassed or beaten. They're going to protest anyway. And that really is the essence of it, because if they had not passed that fear barrier, we wouldn't have had the change of regime in Egypt. We wouldn't have had the uprising in Libya, the uprising in Syria, and so on. That something happens that's very close to what we describe in Prince Five Weapons. He comes close to the point where his normal 5 senses can't work anymore. And then he says, I'm going to do it anyway. And when that happens, it's available to each of us. We access reserves of courage and unstoppability, because it's no longer about, I'm doing this for me because it'll make me feel good. It's a case of, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And every major movement that has ever been, from Mohandas Gandhi to Martin Luther King to the peasants' uprisings, have been led by people who've crossed that fear threshold and said, I'm going to do it because it's the right thing, not because it's easy. So that's really where we have to come to terms with our shadow, the fear, the desire to run away, the desire to do things the easy way, and realize that it is our servant. We are not its servant.
we live in a society this day and age that tends to pigeonhole us by telling us what we want to do is to be safe. That we want to be sure that we look into our future and that that's going to be protected and taken care of. But the truth is, the miracle begins by living in the moment and to basically wrestle with that fear that you may have. And for our listeners out there may be dreams that they've been putting on hold, perhaps a life they would like to have, but instead they go ahead and they surrender for something a lot less. And what I mean by that isn't so much what you gain from, let's say, the type of work that you do as a living, but really the loss comes from not being able to express yourself in the world with the divine gifts that you have. And one of the examples you give that I thought was interesting is about a man who felt that, I would like to have a job that pays a salary of $80,000 a year, for instance, but then discovers, I can't stand doing this work, but the reason he wanted that is that he wanted to feel safe and secure. Now, that's what's really interesting, and I know that you conduct workshops where people talk about goals, things they would like to achieve or have. But it's sort of that be careful what you wish for, and I think any of us who have lived long enough realize that's more than just a cliche. It's really quite interesting how what you wish for shows up.
Oh, how beautifully you put it, Dan. I mean, that's exactly it, isn't it? What we wish for turns up, sometimes in the most disappointing ways imaginable. So yes, I mean, we are encouraged to be, by our media and by many companies, we're encouraged to be fearful. I keep getting flyers saying I should buy insurance for this and for that and for the other, and then I should ensure that my heirs and grandchildren and great-grandchildren can still get money even after. And I'm saying, whoa, that's an appealing idea, but it's built on fear. Mm-hmm. And we're encouraged to be fearful because I suppose it makes us better consumers in certain ways. We do buy these products. And, I'm not saying to people don't buy life insurance or whatever, but don't buy life insurance and then fail to have a life. Mm-hmm. And you're quite right when you say, people don't arrange to live in the present. So I'll go back to the example of the young man who said, "Oh, I want the $80,000 a year job," and he got it. And as you say, he couldn't stand it. But what we did was we worked together in a small group, and we said, well, what did you really want when you wanted the first fast car, the $80,000, or I think there were several such people. One wanted 150. What was it you really wanted? And in each case, they said, well, I wanted to feel secure. And I said, well, guess what? By sending out the message to the universe, we're sending out the message, I want this money, I want this car, I need this, I'm not complete without these things. What you're sending out is fear as a message. And if you're living in a place of fear and you send out fear as a message, guess what you get? Mm-hmm. You get more fear. And that's exactly what he got. He got the job, he got the car, he got all the toys, but he couldn't sleep at night because he didn't like the job. He hated the people he worked with. He thought he'd be fired any second. Mm-hmm. So it's a very real case of be careful what you wish for, because it has an uncanny way of turning up. And if that's going to be the case, then make sure you wish for exactly what it is you need. Not what you think you need, but what you actually do need. So if you need security, then start thinking about it from a place of security, saying, I am secure in this and this and this, and I would like more of that feeling in my life. How do I move towards it? And that's an entirely different way of thinking. Otherwise, it's like going shopping, saying, I'm not going to buy a pair of red socks, and all you can see is pairs of red socks. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I was thinking, because, a lot of people, especially when The Secret came out, it was funny to hear the language, and that is from people who had received the movie. And to me, I don't know, maybe it was just my perception of how they were receiving the movie, but they just seem to think, it's like that movie, The Secret. I could just sit around all day and I can intend, and, it's just going to happen eventually. All I got to do is have the power of intention. Then all of a sudden, you're hearing everybody lauding around the law of attraction. I said, I'm starting to hear enough of this nonsense, because that's not how it works. And that's what I love about what you say in your book, that it really takes work. That, let's just say that you are that artist that would just love to make a living just doing art, or you want to be, well, let's say, for instance, a radio show host, or in your case, that you're a writer and you conduct classes. It takes work, but it's amazing that when you start on that path, that when you actually walk on this path, and see, there's an action statement right there, is that opportunity begins to meet up with you in some of the most interesting ways. But as you talk about, one of the things that we need to start doing for this to really begin to happen is, the first thing is that you take action. You actually have to put the work in. But the second thing is, too, is you talk about clearing a lot of that shadow of yourselves, because you can create mind traps, especially when the opportunities show up and you may not see them. Let's talk about how that works.
Yes, well, you're absolutely right in saying that a lot of people sit around expecting that it's enough merely to intend good things and it's going to drop into their laps. These are probably the people who want everything done for them. But the world doesn't work like that. I mean, the moment we're born, we have to start working. We've been in the womb for 9 months and we've had to do nothing. But if we don't take that first breath when we emerge from the womb, we're not going to last very long. We've been fed in the womb, and the second lesson is we have to learn how to feed ourselves at the age of, whatever it is, 2 hours or less. And so it seems to me the messages that are right in front of us, if we want to pay attention to them, are, yes, good things will happen, but then we have to do our part. And our part involves listening very carefully. Things will appear before us. Not all of them will be good things. So, if you believe in the rather simplistic things that tend to be regarded as the aspects of that movie and the book, The Secret, then it'll lead you into a lot of trouble. There's a man I know who has this strange idea that the first person who appears before him is going to be someone he can hire into his company. And because this has been sent by sort of divine guidance. And my thought is, well, yes, this person may have been sent by divine guidance, or this person may not have been. Do your part. Think critically. Or think in terms of, all right, if this is before me, what is the challenge and what is the opportunity? And that's really what the universe wants from us. It wants us to move forward with some faith and with some determination. And you gave some beautiful examples there, Daniel. You talked about, if you want to be a radio host, or if you want to be an artist, or an author. And these are trades that are hard to get into and are quite hard to make money at, because so many people want to do them. But then if you're thinking in terms of, I'll never get to make money at it, guess what? You already are sending yourself a message, a mind trap, that says, I'll only do it if. Now, a lot of what we do in this world, we don't know what the outcome is going to be down the line. We can't tell. It's too far away. And that's exactly as it should be. We take up a career, we hope, because we really love it. Otherwise, it's just a job, you see. But we take up a career and we say, wow, I really like doing this. This really energizes me. And that's really the signal. If it energizes you, if it gives you energy, then whether it pays or not, it's a really good idea to follow that, because at a certain point, it probably will pay you what you need. Will it make you super wealthy? I don't know. I don't know what everybody's fate is. But it will be the best possible way of making a life. And that's at the center of things. So, to sum up, it's the world sends us opportunities. We have to be a little discerning about what opportunities feel, and I use the word feel advisedly, what opportunities feel best, and then we have to do the work. Now, I'll give you an example from my life, and that is, and I tell this example to people, and they often say, "Yes, that's exactly like my life." Yeah. But when I was 19, I think, yes, 19, I was due to go off to college, and everyone had convinced me, you've got to be a lawyer because lawyers make money. Got to be a lawyer. Good trade. Good lawyers make money. And I bought this at the age of 19, even though for me, the law was not something that really fascinated me. I was fascinated by English literature. And so I went to the interviews, and the interviews process was quite rigorous because this was Oxford University, so they weren't just letting anybody in. And I got to the interview, and I remember meeting the tutor there, and he said, "Well, why do you want to study law?" And I said to myself, I have to tell this man the truth. He's probably going to throw me out, but I have to tell him the truth. I said, I don't want to study law. I've been thinking about this very hard. I really don't. I would rather study English literature. And he looked at me a little askance and, picked up the phone and called the English tutor who came in. And we had a three-way conversation in which I had to justify myself. And I thought, well, they're going to be terribly angry. They're going to throw me out. But they didn't. They understood perfectly. And they set me on a course with their wisdom and their generosity. They set me on a course that has kept me engaged in life and passionately interested ever since. And that was, 35 odd years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a risk right there. The rational person would say, "Oh, tell them lies, get the good university, and then try and switch later." And I thought, no, I can't do this. Now, was that dumb luck? Yes. Was it their generosity? Yes. And also, I think it was something within me that I needed to know whether I went to that university or not, which was, this is my passion, and I'm going to pursue it no matter what. And that from that point on, things sort of lined up in a way that was synchronous to an astounding degree. So I give that example in the hope that it will illustrate what can happen when we go to the authentic part of ourselves.
You bring up a great point, and that is, as you went authentically in the direction that you wanted to go. I mean, sometimes it may in the beginning, you kind of go, well, gee whiz, I don't know if I'm ever going to see or experience the break that I'm hopefully looking for, and I think all of us will. And for some, it happens quicker than it does for others. An example of, I remember watching Edward James Olmos. He was the actor that was in the movie Stand and Deliver. Mm-hmm. And he was on a television talk show talking about acting. And he says, if this is something that you really want to do, you will be successful. It will be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 50 years, but you'll be successful. But he also says, if you want to come into this business to become rich and famous, well, then I'm going to tell you, you better go and do something else.
Wise
and
word.
The other thing that was interesting is I have always held that sort of as a maxim for myself. As I began to embark in radio, I remember I did a series of information interviews with people in the industry in various capacities. They could have been hosts, they could have been producers. There was one particular story that I love bringing up while I was on this path, and that is where I met with a lady who was a camera woman for a local television station. Because, this is all broadcast media in one form or the other. And so she agreed to meet with me, and when I met up with her, she sat down with me, and she just kind of gazed at me with one of these really hard gazes as though she's measuring me up one way or the other for whatever reason. And she just simply asks me, why do you want to do this? What it was that I was looking to do, which is to, eventually host radio. And I said, well, it's just something that I always felt that I should be doing. I just feel that I would be very good at it. And she says, okay, good. Because if you were going to tell me that you were going to get into this for money and fame and all that other stuff, I would have just said, we're not going to be able to talk. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Now, fast forward that just a little bit, and I kind of put it on the back burner for a while, for a good couple of years, and then finally I decided to approach it again. You know, and there's that longing. So for the listeners out there, if you've got this longing that you haven't satisfied for something you feel you should be doing, now's the time to get started. And it's just that simple. But I finally one day decided I had to challenge myself due to a particular heartbreak that I had suffered, and it all had to do with me not feeling worthy or good enough. And I think we all feel these different feelings, these mind traps that you talk about in your book. Yeah. And so I decided the best way to do that was to show that I was good enough and intelligent enough by going to a Toastmasters meeting in downtown. Okay, so I figured this has got to be an upbeat, educated group. And so there I am down there, and I'm doing my thing, but then one of the guys gets up to talk about being the world's greatest radio show host. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I approached him after this meeting, and I said, so you host a radio show? He says, yeah, as a matter of fact, I volunteer with the local public broadcasting station. I said, really? So he says, here's the information, go down there, and perhaps they'll give you an opportunity to volunteer in one capacity or the other. If that's what you want to do is get into radio. And I thought, why not? So I pursued that, and instantly the guy says, well, what do you want to do here? And I said, well, what I'd like to do is host, just be a radio broadcaster. He says, well, good, you can start today. This guy's coming in at about 2 o'clock. If you want, why don't you interview him? I thought, well, this is awfully quick. So I sat and I read through the book, Now, remember, my dream, if you want to call it that, was to be a radio disc jockey. You're spinning records and the like, and that in that capacity. So I read this guy's book, or at least most of it. He shows up, and I sit down, and I conduct a 30-minute interview. And just watching this guy light up, realizing that I had actually read his book, that I was really prepared. Watching him light up, I went, wow, I've got sort of a talent I didn't even know of. Well, I did, but in different ways. This is kind of fun. So start moving it forward a little more, and I realize, I'm cruising along, and I'm starting to talk with these people and doing interviews and realizing, boy, I'm starting to get a lot of interesting information here, and I'm learning quite a bit as well. Plus, I really was starting to go, this is something I really feel pretty good at. I enjoy. Now, all of a sudden, as I would tell people about this, now here's a mind trap, and that is, they would say, so what are they paying you for that? And I started slinking my head a little bit like, well, I'm not really making any money. And there was a sort of feeling of shame like, geez, why am I doing this? And that self-doubt that you tend to have. And so time goes by, and I sort of stopped for a bit. And then I looked and I started reflecting on what I was doing and that I'm not doing it anymore, going, I'm really starting to miss this stuff. Then the realization hit me. I said, you know what? I'm sitting in front of anybody that I want to because I've got the PBS label behind me. And I started realizing, if you want to talk to Deepak Chopra and he's in town, chances are pretty good you can land him in the station face-to-face, and you can go head-to-head with this guy and challenge him while you're doing a show and producing something for the listeners of value. And that was the beauty. I started realizing I'm getting paid in leaps and bounds that people can't even imagine right here, plus the experience. So I guess, or I hope that story for the listeners out there says, get on the path, and sometimes it's going to take time. It'll take longer for some, and some you're just going to, see opportunities open up right away. But do it, because the fulfillment that you get and the opportunities that do lay themselves in front of you are quite miraculous. But be careful of the mind traps. Could you talk about some of those?
Oh, that's a beautiful example, actually, Dan. That really is a good one, because one of the elements you described there is that you wanted to be a disc jockey, playing the music, and that was the notion you had of where you thought you ought to go. But when you got into radio, you found that you have this wonderful talent for getting people to talk about what's closest to their hearts, and that this was really something that was alive and well and kicking. And I think that's a wonderful example of a potential mind trap, because sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to be X, and because they're so fixated on, they're going, whatever it is they've decided they really ought to be, usually because they've got an image idea going, they tend to overlook the serious information that's saying, hey, that's a good idea, but this is a better idea. This is a better fit for all the qualities you have. How about this? And so, I think that's a wonderful example you've just given, because you listened to the information that was coming to you almost miraculously, and you said, oh, it's leading me in this direction, and it appears to be a very good fit. And so you took the information that was coming to you, synchronicity, and you used it, you put in the hard work to make it grow into something. And I think that's so important, because if you have that, then when those people come to you and say, so how does it pay? Yeah, sure, it's going to hurt, but it's only going to hurt the ego. It's only going to hurt when you say, oh, these people care more about money than what I do. And so, in some ways, the problem solves itself fairly rapidly, because one can say, well, guess what? I'm doing this because it's the best fun I can imagine having, not because the pay package is huge. And that's when you're a free person. When you're just doing it for the money, when anyone's just doing it for the money, no matter what it is, we are to some extent just enslaving ourselves. We're agreeing to trade in part of our time for a certain amount of wealth back. But when we're doing it because it's just so exciting to do it, then that's an entirely different phenomenon. So there are many, many mind traps like that. John Steinbeck, the Nobel Prize-winning novelist, he famously had this idea that he really ought to be a writer of historical novels, and he wrote apparently 4 very long historical novels about the French Revolution. And nobody wanted them. They were awful. And then he said, well, this is rubbish. He said, I like writing, but I'm going to write about what's right in front of me, namely the people of Salinas in California, the poor people. And he started writing about them. And as soon as his writing appeared, of course it was a success, because from the very first words, people knew that he was fully there, that this was an intelligent, articulate, compassionate person who really cared about what he was doing. He wasn't doing it for the dough. And I think perhaps, Daniel, that's one of your great qualities as well, is that you do your radio interviewing from a place of internal passion about what you do. And that's picked up right away by every listener. They know the difference between someone who's going through the motions and someone who really cares, just as we would if we met someone on the street corner and had a conversation. It comes across even more quickly over the radio waves. So yes, this is perhaps the major issue that we all have to think about, and that is, listen to what your heart tells you, not what your head tells you, because your head will always tell you to go for the safe option.
Of course, mine's a survivor. Exactly.
Yeah, we all have to survive. I have students coming to me. We've just had graduation at Curry College, and I have students coming to me in their final year saying, I'd really like to be a writer. I say, great. I say, do you have what it takes? And they go, oh, well, I think I have what it takes. And I say, well, bear in mind, you might not get any success for 5, 6, 7 years. And some of them go, well, I don't think I can do that. I say, well,
then you don't believe in it too much, do you?
Exactly. And that's what it takes. Writing is a difficult craft. Radio interviewing is a very difficult craft. It can't just be picked up in a second, apart from in very rare cases. It takes time and skill to hone those abilities. And that's when the head tends to get in the way of what the heart is really looking at. And many of my students, of course, do this in their emotional lives too. They decide to marry or have a life partner, the person who looks successful and who has a good job, rather than the person who really makes their day brighten up.
Agreed.
what a mistake it is to go for the money.
It certainly is. I know. I was also thinking, too, for our listeners out there, we're talking with Dr. Alan Hunter. His book is The Path of Synchronicity, How to Align Yourself with Your Life's Flow. When you get into this flow, you're going to have some snags and trouble. And I think sometimes I remember there was a guest I had many years ago who talked about what she called trouble at the border. It's when you take something from a metaphysical reality into a reality. And I think the reason she had that is that it's trying to actually vibrate itself as clearly as it can into the reality you would like to see. And the truth is, when we're talking here about life's flow and synchronicity, we're talking about you, the listener out there, being able to create your own life and your own reality, which is very possible. It's totally possible when you have that focus and you're clear and your intention is genuine. And what's interesting is that when you have those troubles at the border, as she called it, is that life will send you a lot of messages that encourages you to pick yourself back up and keep moving forward. One of those, I remember, was through a TV sitcom that I had seen many years ago. Now, Sandy Duncan was the star in this one, and she had a date with a guy that she'd never met. And so the guy shows up, excuse me, to pick her up. Of course, he's dressed like Elvis Presley. And he's totally doing the Elvis this and the Elvis that. And, of course, the first impression you would get with a guy like that is this guy's a little bit off of his rocker. Okay, but she decides anyway, okay, I'm going to go on this date. It probably will be my last one with this guy, but that's it, you know. So they go, and it turns out that he's actually an Elvis impersonator, and he's on to go do a show, and that's going to be their date. So he goes and he's doing his thing, you know, and the next thing they're in the dressing room and she comes in there and he's kind of taking the Elvis costume off and getting himself ready to really go on the date. And she says, you know, I'm kind of confused here, you know, when you kind of showed up, I thought you were, you know, off your rocker a little bit. He says, well, no, I had to kind of get into the spirit. And she says, well, I'm kind of curious, why do you do this? And he says, well, because I've always wanted to be a singer. And she says, well, why don't you pursue it, you know, and follow that dream? And he says, well, I do. I just kind of changed the dream a little bit. You know, being a professional singer is not something that's easy, but here I get to be doing, you know, Elvis songs, which I really love doing and performing. So I just changed my dream a little bit, but I'm still doing what I love. And she, you know, all of a sudden you can see this look of, wow, I never really thought about it that way before. Sometimes that's all it takes, though, is a small shift.
Yes, yes. Oh, what a wonderful example that is. Yes, you know, and I like that example because it shows that there is a necessity for us to be in two worlds at the same time. Mm-hmm. You know, we have to follow our dream, but not blindly follow our dream because we also have to pay the rent.
Exactly.
And sometimes we do need to alter the dream a little depending on who we actually are. You know, who wouldn't like to be a major media celebrity? But, you know, every day I look in the mirror and I say, well, I'm too old, I've got too much gray hair, and I never was handsome enough. It's not going to happen to me in that way. And, you know, it's not going to happen to many people in that way. So the dream has to exist, but it also has to exist in a way that is not purely fantasy. And I think that's such an important message because there can be few things more sad than someone who's set themselves up as a dream to be Elvis or to be the next whosoever, and it has been unable to fulfill that. That's a way of not seeing your own good qualities. And the dream can work the other way as well. I mean, I remember an interview with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards a while back, and the interviewer was saying, well, you know, how did the Rolling Stones get started? And Jagger and Richards looked at each other, and Jagger said, well, we always wanted to be a cover band. We just do other people's songs. And then we discovered we had a sound of our own, and so we went with it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was, you know, that was a lovely example of, you know, here was what the dream, which had been a certain shape, and the actuality came along. It was a different shape.
Right.
Okay, go with what comes along and work at it. And then, the miracles happen at whatever level they happen. Because in the end, if you make a lot of money or don't make a lot of money, it matters less than that the entire procedure feeds your soul.
Exactly.
Makes you feel vital, connected, and alive. And that's the bottom line.
We recently had the #1 best-selling author in Sweden on our program. And I think she's in her early to mid-30s, give or take. And it was interesting because here she was cruising along in a career, which I can't even remember what it was now, and she had said, I've always wanted to be a writer. And one day she just simply said, I'm going to go and I'm just going to follow this and just do it, even though I've got this career that I'm involved with. And she simply went to one single creative writing class. She was like, this is easier than I thought. So she just started writing. And the next thing you know, she's the best-selling mystery writer or best-selling author in Sweden.
Beautiful.
And it's enjoyable to have people on that show because these are people that generally people don't hear about. We hear, on cable television, billboards, it's all around the show, these big shot celebrities, but these people started out just about like everybody else for the most part. They just had those lucky breaks. But I think the mind trap comes from simply saying, well, I can't live up to that or be like that, so why should I even bother trying? But I always say that what you should do, and you say this pretty much in your book too, is that follow your path just to see where it takes you, because you just never know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very good advice, actually, and that's a wonderful example, too, about the...
Because you already know the path you're on isn't making you feel happy.
Yeah, so... Oh, yes, it's... it's one of those things that when the universe throws enough hints in your direction, it's a pretty good idea to pick them up and see where they take you. And it might just be exactly where they take you to. In the book, I describe several events from my own life, which at first sight I thought, oh, well, this isn't quite what I imagined. But it turned out to be exactly what I needed. Mm-hmm. And that's really important because actually, we're human, we're constrained in our lives, and we don't see everything. We can't see how anything is going to unfold, what the next step would be. So to hang back from something because we can't see a result, because it's uncertain, because we're afraid, is no excuse, really. I mean, that just keeps us stuck. We have to follow these suggestions, and we have to do so mindfully. And I'm reminded of years ago, I was teaching a writing workshop to mature students, and there was a gentleman there, he was 75, and he said, I've just retired from being an engineer, but I've always wanted to be a writer. And I said, oh, good. I said, when was the last time you did any creative writing? And he said, well, when I was about 17 or 18. Gosh, he's 75 now. And unfortunately, he had let the dream hang on too long. And so now there he was at the age of 75 with he had this nice retirement package and he was very wealthy, but he couldn't remember what it was he wanted to say.
Oh, no.
And it was a real struggle for him to face the fact that he might have taken perhaps creatively the wrong turning very early on in his life. And that's a heartbreaker. And I would rather that people perhaps earned a little less money, but grew their psyches and their awareness and their ability to connect with other people and their sense of the wonder of the world. I would much rather that than that he had the most glorious retirement package in the world.
I'm reminded of a friend of mine that told me, and that's a great story about what he said, and that is that God gives all of us gifts that we're supposed to use and express in the world. And if you don't use them, then eventually they get taken away, and I can see that this obviously happened.
Yeah, and it's very sad. In fact, there's a bit in the New Testament about that, isn't there? the parable of the servants who get given money, and the one who does nothing with it actually has his money, his talent, as it's called in the Bible, taken away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you believe in the Christian Bible or not, it's a great metaphor for exactly what you're talking about. That we're given gifts, and if we don't use them, they wither, they atrophy, and they're gone. And that's a terrible, terrible loss, it seems to me.
Now, for the listeners, let's go ahead and see how we can suggest through your book that they can get into their life's flow with the time that we have left.
Yeah. Well, as I said right at the beginning of the program, if you accept that there is flow in life, and it seems to me that most people do accept that there is such a force available in the world, we then have to start, listening for it. And listening for it in exactly the ways that we've been describing. In other words, not saying, I want to be a famous this or a star of that, but saying, okay, what seems to be true of my individual and particular talents? Now, that's very hard for most of us to do because we've had a lifetime of parents and schools and so on trying to steer us towards things that suit their agendas, but not our agendas. When we start to listen, then we'll begin to see opportunities coming our way. When we listen to what's truly in our hearts, we'll be able to say things like, this just isn't me, but this does give me energy. When we're in the place of energy, we then have to fight once again against the power of the ego, which, of course, we all like the idea of being the success, but if we're only looking for success, as we've said, this is not a healthy recipe. And that's when we need to take really a comprehensive inventory of who we are. And by taking this comprehensive inventory, that's part of the descent into the self and to meet the shadow self. Mm-hmm. Because what I always find with my students and my counseling clients and the people I work with in my workshops is that when we get beyond doing the expected, being nice, and we start to contact that chaotic energy, as Prince Five Weapons did with the monster there, when we contact that energy, we find there's a lot of it. And this is all the strong energy that we have suppressed in order to fit in. So the idea is not anymore to fit in. The idea is to listen to this energy within ourselves, to control it, to use it the way it best can be used. So, for example, if we think of someone like Picasso, just a fabulous artist, became fabulously wealthy, a man who till his dying day was turning out 4 or 5 pieces of work a day, every day. He just did not stop. But within Picasso was a formidable energy, a dark energy. I mean, those pictures of bulls and bullfights, Guernica, his famous piece on the bombing of that Spanish town, is a masterpiece, but it's also ghastly, it's dark. Mm-hmm. And I give that example because he used his dark energy, his fascination with violence and destruction and blood, and he said, there it is, this is what human beings do to each other. Why does it have to be this way? That's what the painting is about, really, it seems to me. And that's what I'm describing in terms of the descent into the self that puts us in touch with these dark, passionate emotions and then uses them productively. Because otherwise we'll spend our whole lives trying to use all our energy to be nice and not be able to use our energy for anything else. Artists do this all the time. They take negative emotions like anger, like rage, and they turn them into art for, if you like, the rest of us, so we too can say, oh yes, I've got some of that within me, but I'm not going to give in to it. Like Prince Five Weapons, he turns the monster into his servant, and he uses it to guard the sanctuary in the forest. And so this is a major challenge, it seems to me. When I wrote this book on synchronicity, I'm an academic. I write books on all sorts of things, but I was very aware that perhaps some of my colleagues would say, "Oh, synchronicity, who believes in that?" And I said to myself, "Well, I'm sure that's going to happen, and I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to take my beliefs and wear my heart on my sleeve and say, this is who I am, deal with it."
Exactly.
Now, I do that not in an, I hope I'm not doing it in an arrogant sense, because it represents, I guess, a risk. But I think we have to tell our truth with all the courage that we've got, because it's a necessary truth. And that's what the descent into the self told me. It said, don't play safe, don't be fearful, don't give in to what you imagine the rest of the world may say. Tell it the way it needs to be told, and then it will have effectiveness. So that in some ways, to get to the place of using synchronicity, we have to be prepared to stick our necks out. And I have to say, as I was writing the book, it wasn't a problem, because it felt like whenever I turned round, there were more and better and more useful examples popping up before me. And so at the end of every day, I would look at the page and say, wow, thank you, wherever this came from, thank you. Mm-hmm. And the next day, it would keep happening again. And that's when I realized, of course, we're not here on Earth to fill our pockets with dollar bills. We're not here to be famous, as Mother Teresa said. We're here to find out what it is that the world needs us to do to help to make it a better place.
Exactly, to take what you have and to live in the service of others, that's for sure.
Yes, and it's the service component, Daniel. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. It's the service component. It doesn't matter if, any of us get wealthy or not. What matters is whether we have done something which is going to serve others and move them towards a more joyous, a more aware, a more compassionate life. That's what really matters.
Agreed. Tell you, this is certainly a subject you can go on for hours talking about to inspire the listeners, but unfortunately, you're going to have to take action, and that's what we encourage people to do on our program. Pick up the path of synchronicity and align yourself with your life's flow. Dr. Alan Hunter, thank you for joining us on the program. If you could give the listeners a website they can find out more.
Yes, Daniel. My website is www.Alan Hunter, that's ALLAN, Hunter, all one word, alanhunter.net. That's my website. My books, all of my books, there are now 10 of them, are on Amazon.com. There's an author's web page there, just showing the books, and they're published by Findhorn Press as well, in Europe and in this country. So please, if you would like to go to those sites, and if you have any questions, there's a correspondence box on my website, www.alanhunter.net. And Daniel, it's been such a privilege to talk with you. This has been a great conversation.
Always a pleasure to talk with you as well. Thank you for being on the program.
Well, I'm privileged to be here. Thank you.
Thank you again. The Path of Synchronicity is the book, How to Align Yourself with Your Life's Flow. Our guest, Dr. Alan Hunter. We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us and participating as well. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well, and visit our blog. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Daniel Davis. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.